The courtroom fell completely silent the moment the judge slammed his gavel. Everyone stood. But one person remained on his knees, not because he was guilty, because he was quietly picking up a stack of legal files someone had accidentally knocked onto the floor. He wore faded gray janitor overalls. A worn cleaning cart stood beside him. The courtroom barely noticed him, until Judge Harold Whitmore looked down from the bench. His voice echoed across the room. "Janitor." The entire courtroom turned. "What exactly do you think you're doing in my courtroom?" The man calmly looked up. "I'm just cleaning up the files, Your Honor." Judge Whitmore rolled his eyes, then cleaned quietly. A few people laughed. The janitor simply nodded. He carefully placed every file back onto the attorney's table without saying another word. His name was Daniel Carter. 42 years old. African American. Soft-spoken. Always the first person to arrive every morning. Always the last to leave every night. To almost everyone inside the courthouse, he was invisible. Nobody knew anything about him. Nobody asked. Daniel quietly pushed his cleaning cart toward the hallway, but before he reached the door, the judge spoke again. "Ladies and gentlemen," the courtroom looked back toward the bench. Judge Whitmore smiled sarcastically. "Please make sure none of your important documents disappear." He glanced directly at Daniel. We all know some people get curious around expensive paperwork. The room erupted with uncomfortable laughter. One young attorney forced a smile. A few jurors exchanged awkward looks. Daniel stopped walking. His grip tightened around the cleaning cart. For just 1 second, his eyes closed. Not in anger, in disappointment. He slowly turned around. "I've worked in this courthouse for 11 years, Your Honor. My record has always been clean." Judge Whitmore leaned back in his chair. "I'm sure it has. But nobody comes to court to hear speeches from the janitor." More laughter. Daniel simply nodded. "Yes, sir," he walked away, without another word, without defending himself, without raising his voice. Everyone assumed the story was over. They were wrong. Outside the courtroom, Daniel continued polishing the marble hallway floor. People walked past him without making eye contact. Lawyers, police officers, reporters, court employees. To them, he was just another maintenance worker. An elderly woman slowly approached him. She had watched everything. "I'm sorry about what happened." Daniel smiled gently. "It's all right, ma'am." "No," she whispered. "It wasn't." She looked back toward the courtroom. "Some people mistake a uniform for a person's worth." Daniel nodded. "My mother used to say, the loudest people usually know the least." The elderly woman smiled. "You must have had a wonderful mother." "I did." Daniel returned to work, like nothing had happened. But upstairs, Judge Whitmore was still laughing about the incident inside his private chambers. "I swear," he joked to another attorney, "these janitors are starting to think they're part of the legal system." The attorney laughed politely. Then a courthouse clerk rushed inside. "Your Honor, the federal court delegation just arrived." Whitmore immediately stood. "So soon?" "Yes, sir, they're already downstairs." Whitmore straightened his expensive, black judicial robe. Everything about his attitude changed instantly. Because today's visitor wasn't just any judge. It was one of the most respected federal judges in the country. Someone even state judges treated with enormous respect. Judge Whitmore smiled confidently. "Perfect. Let's give them the welcome they deserve." He had absolutely no idea that within the next few minutes, that same federal judge would walk past every attorney, ignore every politician, ignore every senior official, and stop directly in front of the man pushing the old cleaning cart, looking him straight in the eyes with a warm smile, and say words that would leave the entire courthouse frozen. "Good morning, Mr. Carter." The courthouse lobby buzzed with activity. Court clerks hurried between offices. Attorneys reviewed thick case files. Deputies stood near the security checkpoint. Everyone waited for the arrival of the federal delegation. Judge Harold Whitmore adjusted his robe one last time. He stood at the front entrance with several senior attorneys expecting to be the first person greeted. Outside, 3 black SUVs slowly pulled to the curb. The courthouse doors opened. Federal security officers entered first. Behind them walked Chief Federal Judge Eleanor Brooks, a respected jurist whose opinions were studied in law schools across the country. The entire lobby fell silent. Judge Whitmore stepped forward with a confident smile. "Welcome to our courthouse, Your Honor." He extended his hand. But Judge Brooks didn't even notice it. She kept walking, straight past him, past the attorneys, past the county officials. Her eyes were searching for someone else. Judge Whitmore frowned. The lobby grew strangely quiet. Then, Judge Brooks smiled. A genuine smile. She walked directly toward the hallway, where a janitor quietly mopped the marble floor. Daniel Carter looked up. Their eyes met. Without hesitation, Judge Brooks extended both hands. "Good morning, Mr. Carter." Daniel smiled warmly. "Good morning, Judge Brooks. I wasn't expecting you until this afternoon." She laughed softly. "Our meeting finished early, so I thought I'd surprise you." The entire lobby froze. No one moved. No one spoke. Judge Whitmore stood speechless. The most respected federal judge in the state was greeting the courthouse janitor like an old friend. Not just politely. Respectfully, Judge Brooks looked at Daniel with genuine admiration. "I heard you've been keeping this old building spotless." Daniel chuckled. "I try my best. It's honest work. It always has been." She nodded. "And you've always taken pride in it." Behind them, whispers spread across the lobby. "Who is he? Does she know him? How does a federal judge know the janitor?" Even the sheriff looked confused. Judge Whitmore slowly approached, trying to regain control. "Your Honor," he forced a smile. "I wasn't aware you knew our maintenance staff." Judge Brooks turned toward him. Her expression remained calm. "I know Mr. Carter very well." Whitmore laughed awkwardly. "Well, I suppose he's made quite an impression around here." Daniel quietly lowered his eyes. He clearly wasn't interested in embarrassing anyone. But Judge Brooks noticed something. She looked carefully at Daniel's face, then at the courtroom door, then back at Judge Whitmore. Her smile disappeared. "Daniel," she asked quietly, "has something happened this morning?" Daniel hesitated. For several seconds, he said nothing. Finally, he smiled politely. "It was nothing. Just another day." Judge Brooks had spent 25 years reading witnesses. She knew immediately. That wasn't the truth. She gently placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "You've never lied to me before, so don't start today." The hallway became completely silent. Every employee stopped working. Even the security guards listened. Daniel looked around. He didn't want attention. He didn't want revenge. Finally, he spoke. "There was a misunderstanding in courtroom 3. I was cleaning. Judge Whitmore made a few jokes. That's all." He smiled again. "I'm all right." Judge Brooks slowly turned toward Whitmore. "What kind of jokes?" Whitmore laughed nervously. "Oh, nothing serious. You know how courtrooms are. Just harmless humor." No one else laughed. An elderly court reporter quietly lowered her head. A young prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. The silence itself answered the question. Judge Brooks looked around the lobby. "I'd like someone besides Judge Whitmore to explain." No one moved. Until a nervous young bailiff slowly stepped forward. "Your Honor, I was there." Whitmore immediately interrupted. "Officer, that won't be necessary." But Judge Brooks raised one hand. "It will." The bailiff swallowed hard, then quietly repeated every word the judge had said. Every sarcastic remark, every insult, every laugh from the courtroom. As he spoke, Judge Brooks's expression became colder. Not angry, disappointed. When he finished, she looked back at Daniel. "You still defended him." Daniel looked confused. "What do you mean? You called it a misunderstanding, even after he humiliated you in front of an entire courtroom." Daniel shrugged gently. My mother taught me, people eventually reveal who they are. You don't have to help them do it. Those words hit the lobby harder than any argument ever could. Judge Brooks smiled sadly. I see she raised an exceptional man. Then she turned toward Judge Whitmore. For the first time, her voice carried the unmistakable authority of the federal bench. Judge Whitmore, I believe you and I need to have a very serious conversation. Whitmore forced another smile. Of course. My chambers? Judge Brooks looked directly into his eyes. No, she glanced around the crowded lobby. We'll have this conversation right here. The entire courthouse held its breath, because everyone realized the balance of power had just changed. The courthouse lobby became so quiet, even the ticking wall clock could be heard. Judge Harold Whitmore forced a smile. I'm sure this is all one big misunderstanding. Chief Federal Judge Eleanor Brooks looked at him without blinking. A misunderstanding? You publicly humiliated a courthouse employee in front of attorneys, jurors, deputies, and civilians. Whitmore quickly replied, I was only trying to lighten the mood. Judge Brooks' expression never changed. Humor that depends on humiliating someone with less authority isn't humor. It's abuse. No one dared to speak. Even the deputies standing near the entrance remained perfectly still. Whitmore cleared his throat. With respect, Your Honor, he's just the janitor. The words echoed through the lobby. Daniel lowered his eyes, not because he was ashamed, because he'd heard those exact words thousands of times. Judge Brooks slowly turned toward Daniel. Mr. Carter, would you mind telling everyone why you continue working here? Daniel smiled politely. I don't think that's important. It is today. He looked around the crowded lobby. Every eye was fixed on him. After a long silence, he nodded. All right, I started cleaning this courthouse 11 years ago. Back then, my wife was battling cancer. Every dollar mattered. So during the day, I worked construction. At night, I cleaned this building. Several people exchanged surprised glances. Daniel continued, when my wife passed away, I wanted to quit. But my daughter asked me something. He smiled sadly. She said, Dad, who will make the courthouse shine if you leave? A few people quietly smiled. Others looked down. So I stayed. I kept cleaning. Not because I had to, because I gave my daughter my word. The elderly court reporter wiped away a tear. Judge Brooks nodded gently. And every evening, what do you do after work? Daniel looked almost embarrassed. I teach. Several attorneys frowned. You teach? A free evening class for young people who want to become lawyers but can't afford tutoring. Now the whispers started again. I've heard about that program my nephew attends. I didn't know he ran it. Daniel quickly interrupted. It's nothing special. We only help around 30 students. Judge Brooks smiled. 30? She looked toward the attorneys. Last year, 23 of those students passed the state law entrance examination. Several lawyers stared in disbelief. One young prosecutor whispered, That's impossible. Judge Brooks shook her head. No, what's impossible is that almost no one here knew who made it happen. Whitmore shifted uncomfortably. He still wasn't impressed. That's admirable. But I fail to see what it has to do with today's matter. Judge Brooks looked directly at him. It has everything to do with today's matter. You judged a man's value, based entirely on the uniform he wore. Whitmore crossed his arms. I judged his position. Judge Brooks replied immediately. No, you judged his humanity. Silence then. An older attorney slowly raised his hand. Your Honor, I know, Mr. Carter. Everyone turned toward him. The attorney walked toward Daniel. My name is Richard Lawson. Daniel smiled. Good to see you again. Lawson faced the crowd. 10 years ago, I was ready to quit law school. I couldn't pay tuition. I couldn't buy books. I couldn't even afford bus fare. He pointed toward Daniel. This man paid my rent for 3 months. Daniel immediately interrupted. It was a loan. Lawson laughed. I tried to repay it. You refused. Daniel shrugged. You became a lawyer. That was enough. Another voice came from the back. A female prosecutor stepped forward. He bought my bar exam books. Another attorney. He paid for my interview suit. A bailiff. He secretly paid my mother's hospital bill. One by one, people from every corner of the courthouse stepped forward, each with a different story, each connected to the same man, the janitor. Judge Whitmore looked around in complete disbelief. His confident expression slowly disappeared. He had worked beside Daniel for nearly 6 years, yet he knew absolutely nothing about him. Judge Brooks finally spoke. You've spent years walking past this man. You saw his mop. You saw his uniform, but you never saw the person. Daniel quietly smiled. I never expected anyone to. Judge Brooks looked at him. That's exactly what makes you extraordinary. Then, a black SUV pulled up outside the courthouse. One of the federal security officers received a message through his earpiece. He immediately walked toward Judge Brooks. Your Honor, they've arrived. Whitmore frowned. Who's arrived? The officer answered calmly. The property trustees. Daniel sighed quietly, almost as if he already knew why they were there. Judge Whitmore looked from the officer to Daniel, then back to Judge Brooks. For the first time that morning, a strange feeling settled into his stomach, because everyone in the lobby realized there was still something about Daniel Carter that no one had been told. The courthouse doors slowly opened. 3 professionally dressed men and 1 woman walked inside carrying thick leather portfolios. Every one of them wore official trustee identification badges. The lead attorney looked around the lobby. His eyes immediately landed on Daniel. He smiled. Good morning, Mr. Carter. Daniel nodded politely. Good morning, Mr. Hayes. Judge Whitmore frowned. You know him too? Mr. Hayes looked confused. Of course, we've represented Mr. Carter's family for nearly 12 years. A strange silence filled the lobby. Judge Brooks stepped aside. Please, I think everyone deserves to hear why you're here. Mr. Hayes opened his leather portfolio. Inside were several official property documents. He carefully placed them on a nearby conference table. Then he looked toward Daniel. I apologize for arriving earlier than scheduled. Daniel smiled. That's all right. The meeting was supposed to be private anyway. Whitmore interrupted. What meeting? Mr. Hayes looked surprised. You weren't informed? No. The county's lease renewal expires in 30 days. Several county officials exchanged nervous glances. Mr. Hayes continued. The courthouse occupies this property under a long-term private lease. One commissioner whispered, Private lease? I thought the county owned the building. Mr. Hayes shook his head. The county owns the court operations. It does not own this historic building. He gently placed one document on the table. This property has belonged to the Carter Family Trust for over 60 years. Gasps spread across the lobby. Judge Whitmore stared at Daniel, then at the paperwork, then back again. No, that's impossible. Missed. Hayes calmly pointed toward the official seal. It is public record. When Daniel's grandfather passed away, the trust transferred controlling ownership to Mr. Daniel Carter. The room went completely silent. The janitor owned the historic building where the courthouse operated. Not the court, not the judges, the building itself. Daniel quickly raised his hand. I never tell people. Mr. Hayes smiled. We know. You've spent years asking us to keep your name confidential. Judge Brooks folded her arms. Tell them why. Mr. Hayes nodded. Mr. Carter refused to use his ownership for attention. He instructed the trust to renew the county's lease every year, at well below market value. Another commissioner looked shocked. How much below, Mr. Hayes answered without hesitation. Approximately 65%. The commissioners looked at one another. If he charged market rent, the county would owe millions more every year. An elderly clerk covered her mouth. A deputy sheriff whispered, "He's been saving taxpayers' money for years." Daniel looked uncomfortable. It wasn't a big deal. Mr. Hayes smiled. To the county budget, it was a very big deal. Judge Whitmore felt his throat tighten. Every sarcastic joke, every insult, every laugh from that morning came rushing back into his mind. He slowly looked at Daniel. You own this building?" Daniel answered quietly. "My grandfather believed justice should never become a business, so our family has always leased it fairly." Whitmore couldn't speak. Daniel continued. "My mother made me promise something before she passed. If I ever inherited the property, I was never to use it to make anyone feel small. So I kept cleaning. I wanted people to treat me the same way they treat anyone else." Judge Brooks looked directly at Whitmore, and today they did. Those words struck harder than any courtroom ruling. Whitmore lowered his head. For the first time in years, he had no defense. No clever remark. No authority to hide behind. Then Mr. Hayes opened another folder. "There is one more matter." Daniel looked surprised. "I thought we'd discuss that next week." "We were going to. But after what happened today, the trustees voted unanimously this morning." Everyone looked at him. "What vote?" Mr. Hayes took a slow breath. "The Carter Family Trust has decided to permanently transfer ownership and management of the property." The entire lobby leaned forward into a new public justice foundation. Daniel looked stunned. "What? You never told me." Mr. Hayes smiled. "We wanted to surprise you. You'll serve as chairman. The building will continue serving the public, but now scholarships, legal aid clinics, and community education programs will also operate here." Several young attorneys began quietly applauding. The applause slowly spread. Daniel immediately raised both hands. "Please, this isn't about me. It should never be about me." Judge Brooks smiled proudly. "That's exactly why you deserve it." Judge Whitmore stood frozen. He realized something that made him feel even worse. The man he mocked had just donated a multi-million-dollar property to help people he would probably never meet. And then, Judge Whitmore slowly stepped forward, his hands trembling, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Carter, I owe you more than an apology." Daniel looked at him calmly. The entire courthouse waited, because what happened next would decide whether this story ended with revenge or something far more powerful. Not a single person in the courthouse moved. Judge Harold Whitmore slowly walked toward Daniel. For the first time in his 28-year judicial career, there was no confidence in his stride. Only regret. He stopped a few feet away. The entire courthouse watched. Lawyers, deputies, court clerks, reporters, even the federal security officers remained silent. Whitmore took a deep breath. Then, he removed his black judicial robe. A wave of whispers spread across the room. He carefully folded it over one arm, standing there in nothing more than a white dress shirt and navy tie. He no longer looked like a powerful judge. He looked like an ordinary man who had made an extraordinary mistake. He looked directly at Daniel. "Mr. Carter, I've spent years asking juries to judge people by evidence." He paused. "But today, I judged a man by his uniform." His voice cracked. "And I was wrong." The room remained completely silent. Whitmore continued. "When you walked into my courtroom this morning, I never asked your name. I never thanked you for keeping this courthouse clean. I never wondered what kind of father you were, what kind of neighbor, what kind of human being." He lowered his head. "I simply decided who you were, because you carried a mop." Daniel said nothing. Whitmore looked at Grace. The little girl held her stuffed rabbit tightly against her chest. "I'm especially sorry," he said softly, "that your daughter had to watch an adult treat her father that way." Grace looked at her father. Daniel gave her a reassuring smile. Whitmore's eyes filled with tears. "I have grandchildren. If someone spoke to their father the way I spoke to you, I would be furious. He swallowed hard. So today, I am furious. At myself. Several people quietly wiped away tears. Judge Brooks watched silently, allowing the moment to unfold naturally. Whitmore took one final step forward. Mr. Carter, I cannot erase what I said. I cannot erase the laughter. I cannot erase the humiliation. But I can promise you this. From this day forward, no person will ever be treated that way in my courtroom again. Daniel finally spoke. His voice remained calm. Do you mean that? Whitmore answered immediately. With every part of me. Daniel smiled gently. Then you've already taken the first step. Whitmore looked confused. Daniel continued. My mother believed something. She used to tell me, an apology doesn't prove someone was weak. It proves they finally became strong enough to face the truth. The courthouse became silent once again. Judge Brooks smiled. That's a lesson every courtroom should remember. Daniel extended his hand. Whitmore looked at it. For a moment, he couldn't believe it. After everything that had happened, Daniel was offering him forgiveness. Their hands met. The handshake lasted only a few seconds, but somehow it felt larger than the courtroom itself. Applause slowly echoed through the building. Not loud, not dramatic, just honest. An elderly court reporter smiled through tears. The young bailiff who had spoken the truth quietly clapped. The attorneys joined. Then the deputies. Finally, the entire courthouse applauded. Not because a wealthy man had been revealed, not because a judge had been embarrassed, but because respect had finally won. 3 months later, the courthouse looked different. A new bronze plaque stood near the entrance. It didn't mention Daniel's wealth. It didn't mention the family trust. It simply read, every person who enters this building deserves equal dignity, equal respect, and equal justice. Below it was a smaller line, dedicated to the workers whose service often goes unseen. Judge Whitmore had insisted the plaque be installed. Every new courthouse employee was required to read it during orientation. The courthouse also launched a new scholarship program for custodial workers and their families who dreamed of careers in law. The first scholarship? It was personally funded by Judge Whitmore. But he refused to have his name placed on it. Instead, he requested a different name. The Daniel Carter Opportunity Scholarship. Daniel almost refused. Until Grace smiled and whispered, Mom would have liked that. Daniel smiled. I think she would have. One quiet evening, Daniel finished mopping the same courtroom. He placed the mop back into the cleaning cart. Judge Whitmore walked in. This time, he picked up the bucket himself. I've got this side. Daniel laughed. You don't have to do that, Your Honor. Whitmore smiled. I know, but I want to. The two men quietly cleaned the courtroom together. No cameras, no reporters, no applause. Just two men who had both learned something important. As Daniel switched off the courtroom lights, Judge Whitmore looked around and said, You know, I used to think this courtroom belonged to judges. Daniel smiled. No, it belongs to the people who walk into it hoping to find justice. Whitmore nodded. And sometimes, the first step toward justice is simply seeing the person standing in front of you. Daniel gently pushed his cleaning cart into the hallway. Grace ran toward him with a huge smile. Ready to go home, Dad? Daniel took her hand. I've been ready all day. Together, they walked out of the courthouse. Not as a janitor and his daughter, not as a wealthy property owner, but as a father who never let another person's opinion define his worth. If you believe true character is revealed by how we treat people who can do nothing for us, comment respect below.